Hi everyone, welcome to another Concord and Victory interview. I'm Emilia,
And I'm Tia.
and I'm joined by today's guest, Jonny Kaldor, an Old Stoic and founder of PugPig, and he's a leading figure in digital publishing. Hi Jonny, thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Could you please tell us a bit more about your role at PugPig and what you do?
Yes, I'm the founder, and we're a mobile publishing platform. So we power apps for about 400 magazines, newspapers, and business journals.
Thank you. How did your background in media and tech lead to launching PugPig?
Okay, so I can give you a long answer or a short answer?
Short.
Oh, okay. Oh, damn it. I was kind of enjoying the long answer. I'm going to give you the long answer anyway. So I used to work at News Corp, which, if you know Rupert Murdoch, it was his company. If you ever watch Succession, that's based on Rupert Murdoch. News Corp is his company. In the UK, News UK publishes the Times and the Sunday Times, but also the Sun. And I used to work for News UK running technology there a long time ago, back in 2009. And James Murdoch, who is Rupert's son and who used to be the chief exec of Sky, had been quite successful building Sky TV in the UK. And he came over as the chief exec, and he wanted to build a similar model for news media to the Sky model. And the Sky model at the time was all about subscriptions, about bundling content into these monthly subscriptions, and it's a great way to generate revenue. And his idea was to do the same for news media. And at the time there was nothing like that. But if you think about Apple News Plus today, it was effectively that, but 10 years before Apple News Plus. And I was building the platform for him. So I was running product and technology, and then there was another team running the commercial side. And it was a pretty cool project. So Steve Jobs was behind it, very happy, very excited about about coming along for the ride and for News Corp driving this new proposition. But at the same time, News Corp was getting itself into a little bit of trouble around phone hacking, and it hadn't become public yet, but all of the newspapers in the UK were being investigated by the police, and it was getting very toxic. And so we were building this brand, but at the same time, the company that we were building it from within was in a pretty sticky place. And anyway, so this great idea, this wonderful project where we built an awful lot of technology and a lot of product, got canned pretty much overnight. And so we thought, well, look, we've built this amazing platform. Let's do it again, but for ourselves and offer it as a service to other publishers. So we went from building a B2C publishing brand to building a B2B white label publishing platform. So that's where it came from.
Thank you. What's the best decision you made in the early days of PugPig?
Ooh. Yeah, a couple. I think probably the best decision we made, and actually it came off the back of a bad decision that we made and learnt from, which was that we started very publishing focused, and then early on, like I think a lot of technology startups, we wanted to scale. And we wanted to build the business faster than we thought we could within publishing. So we hired quite a large sales team, and we went out and hedged. We were concerned about the future of publishing, and so we decided we were going to sell to large corporations, to sports clubs, to record companies, and really take the proposition very broad. And that was a terrible idea. And we learned from that, and I think that the learning from that made us refocus into publishing and media, and I think that stood us in really good stead now, because it's an industry where, you're all involved, or at least you're spending a lot of time thinking about the media, and hopefully you're going to get into media, and you probably hear a lot of voices off saying that the industry is in trouble. But actually, I think it's got an amazing future. It's going to look quite different to how it looks today. And I think we've done well by refocusing on that one market and just being really good at doing something very specific for a very particular group of businesses.
Would you say the magazine app model is still relevant, or are we moving on?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think there's a couple of answers to that. You say magazine, are you saying that specifically versus news, or do you mean just generally kind of?
As in kind of like digital publishing versus like actual newspaper.
Yeah, okay. So I think then, in some respects, yes, but in most respects, no. So I think, first of all, if you take digital publishing and actually separate consumer magazines from news, if we start with that, I think when you look at consumer magazines, again, you can split it further into kind of general mass media magazines, which might be things like, I don't know, Elle, Cosmo, Heat, Closer, Us Weekly, these magazines that have content that has a very broad audience and whose business model for the last 15 years has been get massive reach and generate as much advertising revenue as you can off that reach, but not really create one-to-one relationships with your audience. I think that model in its current state is not in a good place. However, if you take the other type of magazines, which are the kind of special interests, so something like Men's Health, Women's Health, Runner's World, Good Housekeeping, Fishing Monthly or whatever, those actually I think have a very good chance of building loyal audiences who are willing to pay for the content, and therefore, I mean, it's not going to be a weekly or monthly magazine that is the future of that brand, but it is going to be content and utility that is delivered for a very specific loyal audience who are willing to pay for that. And then, of course, you've got print magazines. It's very clear that there's a certain genre of magazines that will still do very well in print because they're coffee table books and so on. So their value lies again beyond the content and is more in the object that the content is delivered through. So that kind of covers magazines. And if you look at Hearst UK, for example, and they're one of the publishers we work with, they're going through a big shift right now where, again, understanding that chase for scale is no longer a model that works, particularly with, search referrals falling off a cliff. And I think we're going to come on to that in a bit, so I'll kind of hold off on that for now. But they know that this kind of scale model isn't working. So what they're doing is again, they're doubling down on these brands and they're building these propositions around subscription, but also membership. So building communities of people who, and building content around the reader rather than, creating content and then looking for an audience. And so they're looking for kind of high value, loyal audiences rather than this kind of mass advertising audience. So that's kind of magazines, but then the other half of the question is the news media. You could ask the same question about news media, and I think the answer there is a resounding yes. I think apps, in a world, again, where, well, let me take a step back. So you think about this, again, this advertising model. So traditional media, up until the internet existed, was always had two key revenue streams. There was reader revenue, which is people buying a newspaper, for example, or buying a subscription. And then there's advertising revenue, which is advertisers buying audience or access to audience. And in a typical newspaper, that would be roughly 50-50 split. Sorry, excuse me, I've got something in my eye. And then when internet came along, 1990, people started pushing content out on the internet, and suddenly you went from 3 million readers to hundreds of millions of potential readers. So newspapers were very quick to start giving away their content for free because the understanding was the advertising revenue would more than make up for the loss in reader revenue. And over the last 20 years, that started to get more and more difficult as Google and Facebook and now Amazon and other big players take all of that advertising revenue because they can target readers far better than these newspapers can. And now that's just become even more difficult because, again, if you think about a newspaper, let's talk about the Times, for example, and you go to their website, probably about, and I'm guessing here, so don't quote me on this, but it'll probably be something like 30% of the traffic that goes to the Times is actually going straight to the Times. I want to read the Times, so I go into the Times, I go to the homepage and I start reading. 70% of the traffic traditionally came from search or social. So you're searching for something on Google and it takes you in, and those sorts of people are coming in, they're reading an article and they're jumping out again. So there's a huge audience there, but they're very low value transactionally. Now, the problem with that is when you stake your business's success on that traffic, you are completely at the mercy of the people sending you that traffic, which primarily is Google and Facebook, in recent years. And what happens is someone like Google will change their algorithm without telling you, because why should they? And overnight you might lose 20% of your traffic, which means you lose 20% of your revenue. So that becomes a very fragile business model that you're subject to. Then you start, so for example, in January, Google made another change to their algorithm and The Sun lost 50% of their referral traffic. And that's disastrous, right, for a business if that's a decent chunk of your revenue. What's happening next is, sorry, this is a very long-winded answer to your question, but I hope I'm answering about 5 different questions in one. What's happening now is with AI answers and all of the various ways in which the platforms are delivering a response without having to take you anywhere, the traffic is continuing to fall off a cliff even worse. And publishers now talk about this world of zero Google, and zero Google meaning the day when you literally get no referrals whatsoever. So that 70% of your traffic has literally gone. And so all of that creates a force, which I think, finally answering your question, if the question is around, are apps a way to deliver content for a newspaper or magazines, they suddenly become kind of one of the only ways that you can genuinely build a business. Because the nice thing about apps is that they create a one-to-one relationship between a reader and a brand. So they tend to create more engagement in 2 ways. So we measure engagement both in sessions per month, the amount of times somebody interacts with your brand on a monthly basis, and then session duration. When you add those 2 things together, you'll get kind of overall engagement, which is literally the number of minutes or hours someone spends with your brand over a monthly period. And apps will normally deliver about an order of magnitude, so about 10 times more engagement than a website will. So where you end up with an app is a much, much smaller audience, like a fraction of the audience that you have on the website, but they are 10 times more engaged, and therefore every single person is delivering a whole load more value. So we've seen over the last 10 years apps for newspapers and magazine publishers kind of go on a journey where when the iPad was launched and a couple of years into the iPhone, they were incredibly important, and every chief exec in every publishing company in the world was super intent on building these amazing apps. And then they kind of, and this happens a lot with technology, then they kind of went into this valley of despair where they weren't really delivering the sort of value that people were hoping for, and so they stopped investing in them. And so then you have this kind of terrible, vicious circle where they don't invest in them, so people don't enjoy them, so then they don't invest in them. And magazines particularly went into that valley of despair, and they're just slowly starting to lift themselves out. But with news media, there's a genuine sense that these are now part of the solution to the question, which is what happens if no one's sending you any traffic anymore. And so I was there's a conference called INMA, the International News Media Association, have this congress every year, and it was in New York a couple of weeks ago. And it was amazing. We did this little study tour where The Atlantic and Condé Nast and Business Insider and the BBC and a bunch of other publishers invited us in and talked about their business and so on. And every single one of them is investing in their apps right now because they see that as the best way to engage their audiences.
Thank you.
Are you concerned that AI is going to take over creative jobs?
Oh, it will for sure, yes. But I don't think it'll replace them. I mean, we're all kind of guessing at what AI is going to do, so I don't think any of us can give a solid answer to where it's going to lead, but I think there are a few things that are clear. Because I think about this from a technology perspective as well, you know, because development is also a kind of creative pursuit. And I think, there's a few things to think about. I think the first thing is that newsrooms are already using AI as a tool to help them in their creative pursuit, but it's not doing the creative bit. So I can break down kind of where AI is being used across the value chain, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Within media. Some of it's creative, but some of it's other things. But I think in the creative side, in the newsroom, certainly for things like data analysis and kind of, you know, data journalism, they're an incredible tool, but you need someone to be kind of powering that tool, using that tool and making sense of it. But it definitely allows you to do huge amounts of research in a way that you couldn't possibly do on your own. So there's real power there. You know, there's the drudgery journalism that it will do quite well. So just things like weather and sports reporting and just kind of basic factual reporting. And certainly newsrooms are using it for that. But the current approach is that just frees people up to do, you know, the more important stuff. And actually, where this is tending towards, and news has for a long time, I think, the value of quality news for a long time has been more around insights and opinion and analysis than it has been from pure kind of fact gathering. So the sense is that the quality, certainly news organizations are going to differentiate themselves because they will always have these voices who are real people, who have real opinions and real insight. So I don't see AI hitting that part of the market, but certainly the kind of, you know, the simpler jobs around making a graphic or a, you know, just pulling together content that supports a story that yes, a person would be doing now, that certainly will happen through AI. So there's certainly going to be jobs that don't exist anymore because of it. But I don't think it threatens news media. But then AI is used in so many different ways. So you've got kind of content creation, then you've got content transformation, which is a big one right now, which is taking content of any form and turning it into another form. So that might be creating videos out of text or taking text from video. Basically, you write a story, and this is what a lot of newsrooms we're working with right now are looking at, is write a story once and then repurpose it for every platform. So that might be shortening the 7,000 word essay into 5 bullets, or it might be, again, I mean, you've probably seen that Google, I forget the name of the tool, but where they take a piece of text and they turn it into a podcast. It's kind of cheesy, actually, but you know, those sorts of things I think are quite popular. So you've got content creation, content transformation, then you've got personalisation, where it's not affecting the newsroom, but it's affecting the user experience. So Newsweek, for example, who we're working with, want to create both a homepage, but also the app kind of home screen that is unique for every single reader, which sounds like the sort of thing we should have been doing for years, but we haven't and we don't. But AI certainly will play a big part in that, because it'll be based on what you've been reading, what's in the news today, and it'll put together a kind of homepage for you. But then there's the other areas of AI. There's the bit that we don't really know how it's going to work yet, which is Apple Intelligence. So Apple have been pushing Apple Intelligence for a long time. It still doesn't work yet, so we don't know exactly how it's going to work. It didn't deliver on time. But the idea of an ecosystem where you've got an LLM like ChatGPT or whatever, so when Apple Intelligence gets that far, so you've got this human-computer interaction, but then hooking into through what Apple call app intents. And app intents is a way that app owners can kind of publish services to Apple to say, hey, we're good at doing this. So for example, Good Housekeeping might be good at delivering recipes, for example. And so there's a kind of world of AI there that we're not quite sure how that's going to work, but it'll be somewhere between person speaking to the phone then deciding which brand is better at responding to that request. And that's different to ChatGPT. And Apple have very different drivers, right? Because ChatGPT, like Google, like Facebook, like Instagram, they want to keep you there. They have there's no value to them for sending you off to someone else's website. So everything they do is going to keep you within their world, because that's where they generate maximum revenue. The good thing about Apple is, for Apple, what they want is a buoyant and healthy app ecosystem. So they're actually more a friend of the brand and a friend of the developer. So I think that's going to start to create interesting interactions between users and the phone, and then publishers and brands. So that'll be interesting. Yeah, maybe I should stop talking.
Before I ask another question, does anyone in the audience have a question for Jonny?
Have I used up my 20 minutes already?
Okay. Just wondering. No.
Yeah.
And just a bit about your background. What inspired you to start PugPig after your time at News Corp, and how did your early experiences shape the platform's direction?
Oh, well, I think I've answered the first question. How did our early interactions shape the platform? I mean, our platform is entirely shaped from our customers', I guess, our customers' needs. So we've always been driven by customers. I'm not sure I've got a great answer to that. I mean, our first ever customer was The Week, which is a news media publication. I mean, we learned, well, I guess a major learning there, but I'm not sure how interesting it'll be to you, but one of the weird kind of problems that we come across quite often is, for more traditional news publishers, let's take someone like the Boston Globe, right, which is a very deeply respected, awesome news publication, but still a little bit traditional, I'd say. And they have a sense that because they have a somewhat older audience, they think that their digital product should look exactly like their print product, because they don't want people to be too challenged in how they approach reading it. However, the first project we ever did with The Week also skewed old, and there was also people in the editorial team who thought that for these older audiences, the digital product has to look exactly like the print that they know and love, otherwise they're going to reject it. And thank goodness, we worked alongside a user experience company called ClearLeft, who are based in Brighton. And they just said, no, we're not going to have that as a working assumption. We're going to assume that actually you can represent this beautiful print brand in digital without ever trying to make it look like a piece of paper. And they went out to the readers, and rather than saying, hey, do you want your digital platform to look like print, which is a stupid question because of course they're going to say yes, they actually presented designs that drew on the brand, the same typographical elements, the same storytelling, but just delivered in a digital format. And they loved it, and it was a huge eye-opener for me. And we're talking 15 years ago now, right, where this company that had a very traditional product just took a leap and said, we're not going to take the lazy option and replicate that in digital. We're going to reimagine the product, but we're going to maintain all of the elements of the brand. And it was a massive success. And that was such a huge help for the last 15 years, because we're able to take that example and say, you don't need to be afraid of change. You can make these bold changes, and people will embrace them as long as you manage the change properly, as long as you communicate to people properly as you implement that change. So that was our biggest learning, I think. We still work with publishers who aren't quite bold enough to do that, but it's really important. It's funny, I was talking to a fairly senior person in a big national newspaper a couple of weeks ago, and he is pulling his hair out because the products, it's a very big and well-funded newspaper. They have a lot of money and a big technology team, and they have an app which is beautiful, but it basically looks exactly the same as the paper and the website did, and there's no sense of innovation around storytelling for an audience like you, right? So they're continuing to deliver products for an audience who are on their way out, and they're not thinking about the audiences who are now, coming on. And I think, again, finally hopefully in the next 6 months or year or so, we're going to start seeing some of these publications being a little bit more daring and delivering content in just a more interesting way. And actually, have a look at the news movement. Mm-hmm. So are you familiar with them?
Some.
Yeah, they're cool. So they're a newsroom that has been built from the ground up as a completely new way of storytelling. So it's vertical video driven. It's much younger journalists delivering content in just a much more interesting way. So I think we're seeing some interesting examples now.
How do you balance platform development with the diverse needs of clients ranging from niche publishers to global media brands?
It's tricky. We're a small company. We're only 60 people, so we can only do so much. And actually, that's a good question, because it's probably the toughest problem that we've had to deal with over the last 10 years, is that you have a product team, and this is probably getting in the weeds a little bit. We have a product team, and then you have a customer team, kind of doing exactly what you're alluding to, which is the product team should just be building the platform, and then the customer team take the product and they implement it for a given customer. And what happens is, so we've got this roadmap, we're adding personalisation features and AI features and vertical video and all that sort of stuff. But then, you win a big client like the Boston Globe, and suddenly it's all hands on deck, and it's a real issue protecting this team from this project. There's no kind of easy answer to that, apart from, one answer is be well funded, which we weren't. So we were bootstrapped, which means, we're literally hand to mouth every day, every week, every month. So either be well financed or be very patient, and be very disciplined. But it's hard. Yeah. Well, sorry, there is one other thing I would say to that, which I think we've done quite well, and I know our competitors have done less well. And when I say we, I mean our CTO. I don't take the credit for this, but your product has to be set on a very firm base, such that everybody over here, these 400 brands, are all using the same product, because the risk and the tendency is to go, we'll just do this special thing for this customer, and then we'll do another special thing for another customer, and suddenly you've got 3 versions of the product, and then another customer comes along and you've got 4 versions, and that is completely unmanageable, because then you can't easily bring them back into one, and you end up with 4 different development paths. It's a nightmare. So probably discipline is the most important.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, gosh.